Good afternoon and welcome to Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of election 2020. This afternoon, we are speaking with 4 of the 13 candidates for Chittenden County State Senate. There are 6 seats that are open in effect for these 13 candidates, and part 1 of our forum is now. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Tom Chastanay, Erica Reddick, Ginny Lyons, Phil Baruth. We're going to start with opening comments. Erica Reddick, welcome. You're running as a Republican, I believe. Is that right? Why don't we unmute you?
Yes, I am a Republican, running as a Republican.
Perfect. Would you tell us why you're running and what qualifies you?
Absolutely. I am running because I would really like to see fiscal responsibility and a real strong economic recovery for the state of Vermont. So one of the things that the pandemic has highlighted is that our economy is almost wholly dependent on tourism. And what we really need here in Vermont is to produce things. So the way that you get more money into your state is to produce things that people outside of your state want to purchase. It's a great way to bring in revenue. We want to open up opportunities for small businesses, for entrepreneurs, and other corporations to really thrive here so we can grow our tax base and afford all of the environmental initiatives and justice initiatives that we want. Every Vermonter wants a safe, healthy, and clean lake, clean air, and all of those things, but we have to make sure that we pay for it responsibly rather than continuing to add the weight to the lower and middle class who is just moving out. So we want to really retain people here. I'm qualified because I've spent the last 20 years as an accountant helping other businesses succeed, thrive, grow, and really take off. Having that background in accounting and economics allows me, I think will allow me to really focus Vermont's energy on the things that will move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Senator Ginny Lyons, welcome. Tell us why you're running for re-election and what qualifies you.
Thank you, Lauren Glenn, and thank you, Channel 17, Town Meeting TV, for again hosting these wonderful opportunities for each of us. We are in the middle of volatile times. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know when it will end. We are also in the middle of some significant social unrest in our country, and now we're seeing it in our state. We need experienced leadership to carry our state forward, to patch the holes that we have found during the pandemic. Those are economic holes, public health holes, social holes, environmental holes. We've started to work on that during this session, and as Senator Baruth has indicated, we just finished that session. It was a marathon. I want to say that my experience as chair of my select board in Williston for many years, my work in the Senate as chair of committees in the Senate and currently chairing the Health and Welfare Committee has provided me with the sets of values and the expertise that we need to find solutions going forward. We are currently reliant on federal dollars to close the gaps with COVID, and we will continue to rely on those federal dollars. So I look forward to working on healthcare, housing, food security, energy, and systems that will change our racial and other inequities in our state.
Thank you so much. The first question I have, we're going to start with you, Erica Reddick, is about budget priorities. You know, as the 2 senators mentioned, this session just ended. They just buttoned up the FY21 budget. The work now begins on FY22. And what are your priorities in terms of managing what is very difficult and tight budget situation for the state?
That is a really great question. I think the one thing first that is a very inconvenient conversation that no one wants to address is we're going to have to cut services. I think it's not only unreasonable, but unfair to expect federal dollars to dig us out of this hole, I think it's unfair to ask the rest of the country to fix the problems that have been created by policies that really, make Vermont poor, really for no reason. We make ourselves poor with our high taxes and high regulations. So we need to cut some services. We need to button up those services to make sure that there's not fraud and people taking advantage of it. But most importantly, we really need to open up our economy. We need to make it easier for people to build buildings so that we don't have such a housing shortage. We need to make it easier for people to start businesses. We need to make it easier for people to succeed here so that we can fill those budget holes. And I just found it interesting that Senator Lyons phrased it as, we need experienced legislators to fill the holes we found. But from my experience, the current legislators or the experienced legislators are the ones who have created those holes, like the $500 billion deficit we're facing here between regular budget and the pensions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey, Erica, just 30 seconds on what you would cut.
Well, for starters, one of the things I point out are the solar panel subsidies, which really are a wealth transfer from the lower and middle class to the upper class. Most people who can afford to install and maintain solar panels are high income earners. And yet tax dollars from lower and middle class Vermonters are being used for those subsidies. And there are a number of subsidies like that, in my opinion, again, are a wealth transfer from the poor and middle class to the wealthy. And okay. I just really quick, I'm afraid I said $500 billion deficit. I meant to say $5 billion deficit. So between 4.5 pension deficit and the regular budget deficit, $5 billion deficit. And we've had a credit downgrade. So savings sounds nice, except when you hear that we have had a credit downgrade, which will cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional interest expense because we're not being good with our budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Ginny Lyons, your approval issue and policy for the state going forward.
Thank you. I've been working very hard in this area for the past several years. And obviously the pandemic has intruded greatly, but the pandemic has allowed us to see the importance of healthcare as a business in our state. And one thing that we have recognized is how important it is to stabilize the businesses, the healthcare businesses. For example, if you look at some of the primary care businesses in our rural parts of the state, they are imploding. They've had to close. It's only through the Corona relief funds that we're able to provide funding for those businesses to stay open so that they can bridge the gap until the pandemic is over. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. The vaccine isn't going to be around soon. And so we're going to have to keep our eyes open. One of the things that the state of Vermont is doing that has reached national attention is we have what is known as an all-payer model, a payment per member per month. And that includes payment for services for folks with chronic illnesses and for primary care. That program is stabilizing our healthcare businesses in this state and serves as an important model going forward. There are a lot of areas that I look forward to working on and continuing work on, and the all-payer model is one, with or without a coalition of hospitals driving that. It is more than that. It is all the businesses of healthcare. We also need to look at the transparency of costs, and we just recently passed a bill that I think the governor will sign that allows for the development of a dashboard so people can see what the costs are for their acute care in hospitals, so that people can see what the costs are before they go in for that treatment. That's a big step forward. We're also building other transparencies within the system. And so I'm looking forward to continued work, prescription drugs, insurance, and so on and so forth, so that everyone has access to the public good of healthcare.
Thank you so much. We're going to give everybody 2 minutes on this question because I think it's an important one. Phil Baruth, what's your approach to healthcare policy going forward for Vermont?
Well, I would differ with Tom in the sense that I do believe it's possible for us, like other industrialized nations around the world, to have a system where everyone is included, everyone has access to quality health care, and you don't have people excluded. Tom talked about we had to make hard decisions. If the hard decision means certain segments of the population don't get the same level of treatment, I oppose that strongly. So my wife is from Sweden, and I've spent quite a lot of time looking at their system. In Sweden, nobody goes without medical care. They have additionally subsidized childcare, and most people you talk to have some disposable income left over to travel and do other things. And that's because over the last 80 or so years, they have looked at and figured out how to use different levels of taxation to make sure that everybody doesn't go bankrupt from paying for healthcare, paying for education, and paying for their old age. So once those things are taken care of, then people can concentrate on living their lives the way we'd all like to live our lives, free from crushing debt. I'll just give you one last example. About 10 years ago, I had an incident that I passed out, hit my head on a table. It was the middle of the night. I got taken in an ambulance to the hospital. They were worried I might have had a heart attack, so they ran a huge battery of tests. And I was taken out without my wallet, so they didn't know who I was, and they didn't know whether I had health care. And so I finally got sent a bill for $130,000 for less than 24 hours in the system. And then when they found out I had Blue Cross Blue Shield, it went down to about 300. Now, that tells you that if somebody doesn't have a job that provides them health care, they are screwed to the wall. And that's not America, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much. Erica Reddick, your view of healthcare policy for Vermont going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is also a hot topic for me as a person with a chronic health condition. And I had the experience of having affordable individual healthcare because I am an entrepreneur and small business owner. So I don't have an employer to give me insurance. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed, I lost my health insurance because of the rate increases and how much bureaucracy was added. Whereas before I had good health insurance that I could afford, I no longer could afford it because I made too much money to get a subsidy and not enough money to actually afford the premiums and the deductibles and the actual care that I needed. That's why I'm a big proponent of running healthcare as a business, as Senator Lyons brought up. But here in Vermont and throughout our country, healthcare providers are actually not allowed to run their businesses as businesses. They're dictated to by the government what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to spend, and how they care for their patients. And I personally think that the government should not be the person deciding what kind of care I get. I think that me and my doctor and my family are better able to make those decisions. So I would actually love to see Vermont healthcare providers be able to run their business, as was stated earlier. Also, the Sweden model would be great if we were a country of only a few million people with a stronger capitalist system than we have here in the States, or Vermont in particular. So a very homogenous culture that's smaller, that doesn't have the same problems with various health conditions and things to struggle with. Sweden can do that much easier, and they have a much more robust and open economy than we do here. So we would need to open that up. We would need to deregulate. We would need to lower taxes. And then maybe we could actually have the Sweden model. That would be lovely. Oh, I think I'm getting noticed that I need to stop. But I really do think we can do better here than what we have right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's go on to the question of reparations. This is a conversation that has evolved and gained traction in our country and in our state. And I guess the question that I have here is, what do you think the response to the institutional racism of this that exists within the state and the country is in Vermont? Do you support reparations? What form would that take? And how would you address the long-term imbalance of rights and powers for Black Americans that live in Vermont?
But reparations, I think you can look at in two ways. It's always financial. I think the question is, do you think of it as money that would be given to individuals, or do you think of it as programs that would allow them access to capital, enterprise zones, those sorts of things? And I think of the two, the second route makes a little more sense to me. The idea that we would say, if what we can do is to increase land ownership and capital holding among communities of color, there are different ways to do that besides the state issuing a check and considering its work done.
Thank you very much. Erica Reddick, what are your thoughts on this question about how Vermont should reckon with its history and institution of racism? Do you support reparations? And what recommendations would you have for the task force studying whether the state should make an apology and offer reparations? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Senator Baruth and I agree in one area, so that's amazing. And I just wanted to give that a thumbs up. Further to his point, well, let me back up. As a woman who is married to a Black man, where half of my family is Mexican, a third of my family is Mexican, a third of it is now Black or mixed race, I have a vested interest in making sure that we have a just and equitable system for everyone, because that is the promise of all men are created equal, that we will all be treated equally under the law. And that is the best thing that we can hope for. So if we want to make sure that people of color and disadvantaged communities can overcome the wealth gap or things like that are real, we are facing that, right? So Vermont has the lowest wealth gap of any state in the union. We have the lowest income gap of any state in the union, but it still exists. And my husband and I agree that the best way to make sure that people do not have to deal with discrimination is to provide them the ability to make their own opportunities. I've faced discrimination in housing and employment for things that I've struggled with. And my husband, being a dark-skinned Black man, doesn't have a lot of people that he can stunt double for as a person in the film industry. So he has a really hard time. And he said, you know what? If they're not putting people that look like me in movies, then I'm going to make my own movies. And I just really think that encouraging that kind of spirit, entrepreneurship, small business ownership is how we really get people through having to ask permission for a job, having to ask permission for anything. When we help people help themselves, they don't become dependent on the government. And that's what we should be going for.
Thank you, Erica. Let's go to the F-35s. Now that Chittenden County is experiencing the flyovers of the F-35s, what have you heard from constituents about noise, health, and safety impacts? Erica Reddick, unmute yourself and tell us, we've been hearing about from people in the community about the noise, health, and safety impacts and your view of the F-35's placement in our county.
This is such a hard question to answer. This is the one I'm the most afraid of answering, funny enough. I have mixed feelings about the F-35s. I've heard from constituents on both sides who say that jet noise is the sound of freedom. And then I've heard from people who say that it gives them anxiety and it makes it harder, especially with all the stuff that we're going through. So the question then becomes, if we decide not to host them, where do we make up the budget shortfall? So the federal government pays us millions of dollars to have those planes here. And so if we're not going to have them here, how are we going to make up that budget shortfall? Number one. So this is one of those things I don't have a firm opinion on, but I'm willing to have the conversation with people. If you can tell me where the money's going to come from, okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about it. And then I think about the fact that we have one of the most highly regarded Air Force bases in the country. So the fact that we even got the F-35s and previously had the F-16s is because the Green Mountain Boys have such a high level of integrity and do such good work for keeping our country safe. And as I recall, we were the first, our Air Guard were the first to be on site during 9/11, during the attacks on 9/11. So if we're going to give up that strategic base, where do we replace it? Thank you.
Next question, starting with Erica Reddick. Do you support climate change legislation, and how would you use your role as senator to address the impacts of climate change on Vermont?
That is a great question. And I want to parse out a little bit climate change versus environmental legislation, if I can do that. I always say one of the myths about conservatives is that we don't believe in climate change, and that's not true. We just disagree on the government's role in how we should address it. So I am not for the Global Warming Solutions Act, as an example, for a number of reasons. One is that it gives power to people outside of Vermont to sue us if we don't make the goals that have been set. I don't like the idea of giving control and power to set regulations to an unelected group of individuals that are unaccountable to Vermonters. I don't like the amount of control that they'll have, the blank check that they get from the legislature to do whatever is required. I think that is really troublesome. I think a number of the environmental bills that have been passed and solutions that are being put forth unnecessarily bankrupt our farms, our businesses, and the state of Vermont in general. Like the 3-acre rule is incredibly destructive. It's intended for saving the lake, but we're not holding cities like Burlington accountable for the millions of gallons of raw sewage that they dump into our lake. So what I'm for the climate and for the environment is common sense legislation that actually helps make our environment better rather than offshoring our pollutions to foreign countries, given that we are already a carbon sequestering state.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Phil Baruth, your role as senator to address the impacts of climate change on Vermont, your analysis, please.
Sure. I just want to point out that Erica and Tom told you everything that they wouldn't do to fight climate change. Neither of them named a single thing that they would do to fight climate change. And the time for that is done. Tom is disputing the basic science. That argument is over. That ship has sailed.
The argument's not over, Phil. No.
Well, obviously not for you, Tom.
No.
So what I would say is Vermont and the nation are already experiencing climate change refugees. So my sister moved here to Winooski from California a year and a half ago because California had gotten way, way too hot for her to live in. It was 120 degrees in the summer. It was over 100 in the winter. If her air conditioning broke, she and her daughter were threatened, their health was threatened, and she just couldn't do it anymore. So she moved here, and I think in that way there might be some silver lining for northern states. But basically, the United States and the globe are in the midst of a crisis. So we overrode the governor's veto of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which puts legal standards in place and creates a stick for the state of Vermont if it doesn't meet them. And that's what was lacking in previous legislation, was a stick to make sure that we lived up to our legal obligations. So like it, don't like it, propose something else if you say you oppose it.
We're going to get closing comments. Erica Reddick, closing comment, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I want to just acknowledge Senator Baruth mentioning that for the climate, I didn't talk about things that I would do. And that was a fair critique. I will say that in all of these questions, what I will do is seek data, seek information, and seek experts who will tell us what kind of outcomes we can expect to see from the kind of legislature that we pass. And then I will require metrics and measuring of those things that we do, because a lot of times we see government just adding more money on top of already inefficient systems. And so what I look forward to doing in Vermont as your senator, please go to my website, ericaforsenate.com or ericareddick.com, both work. Check out my detailed economic plan that covers all of the ways that I will work for you, Vermont, to make things happier, healthier, and more livable for Vermonters.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking with 4 of the 13 candidates for Chittenden County State Senate. The second forum will follow. We really appreciate your time today, this sunny, beautiful Saturday. And thank you very much for your public service. We appreciate it. For all of us at Town Meeting TV, please stay tuned to continuing coverage of General Election 2020.